Warning: the following video contains content with any types of humor that are suited for mature audiences and not suitable for younger viewers. Disclaimer: the opinions and expressions on the materials in the video do not reflect those of the original counterparts from any type of media franchise, real-life depictions, regular object observations, and others, etc., and are made for comedy purposes only. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Steam locomotives are considered one of the most memorable pieces in railroading history. They are such an historic icon, especially when they played a huge role in the Industrial Revolution. Many private individuals and groups had restored these historical machines for use on excursion service to educate the public for future generations. Fortunately, a handful of steam locomotives a long time ago had been restored to running condition with an opportunity for excursion service. However, while many other classes of steam locomotives that had been restored a long time ago, which some of them are currently running, under restoration, either cosmetically or operationally, on display, stored for future use, whether for another excursion career or for a future static display piece, there are some steam locomotives that never had an opportunity for a second chance in life. I'm gonna do another trendy list now, inspired by many other Railfan YouTubers who made their owns as well. And without further ado, here is my list of the top 6 missed opportunity steam locomotives for excursion service. Number 6. This is the one and only double bill on this list. So here it is, everyone. Santa Fe 2925 and 5021. A good way to start off the list with my favorite wheel arrangement, the 484 Northern and the 210-4 Texas type as an underrated one. And as always, let's get on with the history of the locomotives. Let's start off the list with 2925. The 2925 is a 2900 class 484 Northern type steam locomotive built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1944 for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, aka Santa Fe Railroad for short. The 2925, along with the other 2900 series, were considered the heaviest 484s that were ever built. Ever since during World War II, wartime shortages of lightweight materials resulted in ordinary metals being used for their construction. They outweighed their nearest rivals by over 2,000 pounds. They have Timken roller bearings on all axles. Between 1946 and 1948, the 2925, along with its other siblings, were then approved for 110 miles an hour speeds with the Santa Fe's express passenger trains after being fitted with Timken roller bearing tandem side rods, up from 100 miles an hour when delivered with its original side rods. However, anecdotes from retired drivers have hinted that the class was able to run at speeds of over 120 miles an hour for miles. The 2925, along with its siblings, were designed to haul heavy, fast passenger trains. Wartime exigencies required that they also haul fast freight until the war ended. After the war, they hauled passenger trains such as the Chief, Scout, and Grand Canyon Limited. The 2925, along with its siblings, continued to operate on the Santa Fe until retirement overtook them in 1955 as one of only 6 surviving 2900s and 9 preserved 18SF Northerns as well. The locomotive was moved to Belen, New Mexico to reside in the railroad's roundhouse there alongside 5011 class 210-4 Texas type number 5021. Between early to mid-1974, there were plans to bring back the 2925 as the motive power for the American Freedom Train while within Texas. The joint inspection revealed that the 2925 would be very suitable. However, certain mechanical experts who were high enough up in the Santa Fe mechanical department said that it would be way too expensive, canceled the whole project. Obviously, the Texas Pacific I-1A 210-4 Texas type number 610 was ultimately the locomotive chosen to handle the Freedom Train throughout the state of Texas. Now on to 5021, which is a 5011 class 210-4 Texas type as one of only 25 large engines that were built by the same company and in the same year as the previously established 2925 mentioned earlier, bought by the Santa Fe in 1944. They were nicknamed War Babies by the 18SF from being built and used during World War II. Numbers 5011 to 5035, when built, were the largest and fastest class of the Texas-type steam locomotives that were ever built, and equipped with Timken roller bearings on every axle. The engines had a maximum output of 5,600 horsepower measured at the rear of the tender, at a maximum top speed storming at 70 miles an hour. Despite being mainly freight haulers, their driving wheels were unusually tall for a Texas type, which also allowed them to be adapted for heavy passenger service as well. The 5021, along with its fellow classmates, continued to operate on the 18SF until being retired in the same exact year, whereas the aforementioned 2925 and its members were taken out of service mentioned earlier, in 1955. The 5021 became one of only 4 surviving 5011 class 210-4s and 5 surviving Santa Fe Texas types in existence as of right now. The engine was moved to Belen to reside in the roundhouse there alongside the previously stated 2925. In the late 70s, Santa Fe briefly considered restoring both the 2925 and the 5021 for their newly proposed steam program, and the 2925 was moved to their Cleburne yard in Cleburne, Texas. However, Santa Fe decided against restoration, the plans never came to fruition and fell through, and the 2925 was moved back to Belen. The locomotives continued to sit in the Belen Roundhouse until 1981, where the 18SF donated them to the Albuquerque Roundhouse in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The locomotives sat at the Roundhouse for nearly 5 years until 1986, when Santa Fe donated both of them, along with many of their other historic equipment, such as diesels, passenger cars, and many other rolling stock equipment, to the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, California, in order for the Albuquerque Roundhouse to be demolished later that same year. Over the course of nearly 3 decades, both locomotives had been exposed to the elements, vandals, neglect, and deterioration before being a little bit cosmetically restored by the CSRM in 2016. As of right now, today, both the 2925 and the 5021 continue to sit on display at the CSRM. The 5021 is also the largest steam locomotive I've ever covered on this list as well. To be honest, if both locomotives would have had the opportunity for a second chance in life, they could have been used for promotional and operating purposes, potentially sparking greater interest in railroading and preserving the steam era. This could have led to more public events and potentially more revenue generated from steam-powered excursion trains. Heck, even if we had 2925 restored a long time ago and used for the Freedom Train, it would have been the first 484 with Timken roller bearings to ever operate an excursion service, even though we had CN0614 as the first ever one. And especially 5021, the same thing, being the first 210-4 with Timken roller bearings ever operating an excursion service. Similar fate to what happened to another 18SF Northern as well that we'll get into later on in the video. But, for the 5021, on change.org, there's a petition about bringing back the locomotive to running condition, which was created by Tim Schrofer. As of right now, there are at least 48 verified signatures who signed this petition. If you guys want to donate to the 5021, feel free to do so and sign the petition in order for the locomotive to run again. And by the time the petition hits at least like 1,000 or maybe even 1,000,000 verified signatures, the locomotive may run again. I'm not saying that it's going to or it's not going to run again, but it's a maybe, ever since the 5021 might have a second chance in life, and maybe even a first time running excursions. And maybe after the petition hits the amount of verified signatures, the CSRM may do a fundraising campaign in order to rebuild the locomotive and bring it back to service. But I'd rather have 5011 running again rather than 5021, ever since it is the first ever prototype of the 5011 class 210-4s, and maybe be in slightly better condition compared to 5021. But it is what it is. Anyways, let's move on to the next locomotive. Number 5. Bessemer and Lake Erie 643. Another 210-4 in this list. This locomotive is the sole survivor of the H1 class 210-4 Texas type steam locomotives built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1944 for the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad, primarily used for hauling heavy mainline freight trains in Pennsylvania and down in Ohio. Between 1929 and 1944, the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad, a Class II company connecting Konya, Ohio, Erie, and Bessemer, Pennsylvania, ordered a fleet of 47 H1 Class 210-4 Texas types, which were nearly direct copies of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, aka Burlington Roots' own fleet of 210-4 Colorado types from the American Locomotive Company, aka ALCO, in Schenectady, New York, and the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The H1 class was divided into 7 subclasses. The design varied little between subclasses with the exception of weight. The use of cast steel frames in different alloys and construction resulted in changes in weight between subclasses. With a total tractive effort of 102,106 pounds, or 115,206 pounds with boosters cut in, a boiler pressure of 250 psi, an average weight of over 500,000 pounds, and 64-inch diameter driving wheels, these were some of the largest and most powerful non-articulated steam locomotives ever built in the United States. The 643, along with its siblings, were assigned to heavy freight work on the BNLE, hauling trains of iron ore from lake freighters at docks on eastern Lake Erie to steel mills in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania era, and coal trains back to the lakefront. In 1951, the BNLE decided to sell 18 of their H1s to the Duluth-Mesabian Iron Range Railway. These H1s were reclassified as E4s, E5s, E6s, and E7s, and they were renumbered from 700 to 717. Number 643, however, remained on the BNLE with the rest of the class. At this time, diesel locomotives were gradually usurping steam as the primary motive power for many North American railroads. And around the time of the sale of several of the railroads' 210-4s, the BNLE made the decision to dieselize its roster. The 643 continued to operate on the BNLE until being retired by the end of 1952, along with its fellow classmates as well. By the end of the decade, almost all locomotives of this particular design were sold for scrap, including all the CB&Q aka BR's Colorado types and all the DM&IR's 210-4s. Despite early dieselization, the BNLE decided to spare 2 of their steam locomotives from scrapping, H1G number 643 and C3B 280 consolidation number 154. For safekeeping, the BNLE stored their steam locomotives inside their roundhouse in Greenville, Pennsylvania, with the intention of donating the locomotives to museums for future preservation. By the early 1980s, the BNLE had decided the time was right to auction off numbers 154 and 643. Steamtown USA, formerly, currently Steamtown National Historic Site, which was still in Bellows Falls, Vermont at the time, started bidding on number 643 with the intent of moving it to Bellows Falls for stag display, and eventually move it along with the rest of the collection to Scranton, which still resides as of right now today. The organization, however, was outbid by a man by the name of Glenn Campbell, who intended to restore number 643 to operating condition for excursion service. Campbell would move the locomotive to the old Union Railroad shop in Hall in 1983 for storage, until he would be able to purchase the former BNLE shops in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. In 1993, number 643 was finally moved to McKees Rocks, where restoration work would begin in earnest. At one point, number 643 was moved under compressed air to test its movement and running gear, and the locomotive was also test-fired to determine its steaming capabilities. By the late 1990s, although restoration work was completed, number 643 never ran on any railroad or pulled trains. Although more than capable of pulling long trains, the locomotive's long, rigid wheelbase and weight necessitated relatively straight and heavy trackage to operate on. Similar problems had marked the excursion career of another 210-4 Texas type, Texas and Pacific number 610 mentioned earlier. In light of this, few railroads could accommodate or were willing to accommodate such a massive locomotive and excursion service. Number 643 remained in storage inside the McKees Rocks shops awaiting an uncertain future, with further doubts cast after the McKees Rocks shops was isolated from live rail by CSX. In 2006, a snowstorm caused cracks to form in the beams supporting the roof of the shops, forcing the movement of number 643 outside before a potential collapse. From then on, number 643 would be exposed to the elements and deterioration while being put up for sale online with a high asking price for its purchase. The locomotive with such a high price attached sat in McKees Rocks without a buyer for several years. In the spring of 2019, however, Campbell decreased the price to $375,000 on eBay, with the added publicity that the locomotive was at risk of being scrapped. In the months following, a willing buyer came forth. On August 5, 2019, the Age of Steam Roundhouse purchased number 643 as an addition to their own collection of steam locomotives in Sugar Creek, Ohio. The acquisition was in tribute to the museum's late founder, Jerry Joe Jacobson, who nicknamed number 643 the King and had long sought to add the locomotive to his roster. With the McKees Rocks yard still landlocked, number 643 would have to be disassembled to be moved by truck. Number 643's boiler was separated from its frame and running gear, and the tender and appliances such as the headlight were moved first to Sugar Creek. In late January 2024, the boiler and frame of number 643 followed, being loaded onto a flat car and moved via CSX Transportation and Norfolk Southern Railroad to the Age of Steam roundhouse. By August 2024, number 643's frame and boiler had been rejoined, and the locomotive underwent cosmetic repairs in the museum's back shop. In February 2025 this year, number 643's cosmetic restoration was completed and made its first ever public debut in the Roundhouse Museum during Members' Day, March 29th, later that same year. Number 643 is the sole survivor of the H1 Class 210-4 Texas types of the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad, and one of only 2 surviving BNLE steam locomotives in the entire world as of right now. The other, number 154 mentioned earlier, another sole surviving class example from the railroad as a C3B as well, on display at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. It ranks among the heaviest and most powerful non-articulated steam locomotives to operate, and one of the largest surviving steam locomotives in preservation in the United States. Number 643 is also one of only 2 210-4s to be restored to operating condition after retirement, the other being the aforementioned TNP 610. As of right now today, the 643 resides at the Age of Steam Roundhouse in Sugar Creek, Ohio. Whether or not it would run again wouldn't be as likely as many other steam locomotives that had an opportunity for a second chance in life. It's a shame that this locomotive never had a second chance in life ever since we were this close to having a Bessemer and Lake Erie steam locomotive used for excursion service. But hey, at least we had the one and only 210-4 TNP 610 mentioned earlier that had an opportunity for a second chance in life. But still, it would have been nice if the 643 would have had another chance in life as well. Maybe when the time is actually right for the AOSR in case they have the money and all, or if there are any good chances if someone that has the money and the know-how to get the job done, and if the Railroad Museum feels like restoring any of their steam locomotives to running condition, then they might consider restoring the 643 to operation. That way, we would have another Texas-type steam locomotive back in steam for nearly over 30, 40, 50, or 60 years depending on its condition. But in the meantime, we would rather let it be on display and wait until further notice, and only time would tell.
There will be, but that'll have to wait until next time.
Anyways, next locomotive. Number 4. Boston and Maine 1455. This is the smallest locomotive on this list, and the only New England steamer as well. And as always, let's begin with the history of the locomotive. The 1455 was one of 135 B-15 260 moguls built by the American Locomotive Company, aka Alcos's Manchester Works in Manchester, New Hampshire, between 1903 to 1910, with number 1455 completed in 1907 and acquired by the Boston and Maine Railroad. The locomotive was numbered as 100 when built in 07 and was renumbered to number 1455 in 1911 and remained with that number while in service with the Boston and Maine. The engine, along with its fellow members, were used for various services including passenger, commuter, freight, and switching within New Hampshire. In 1918, number 1455 was rebuilt and superheated by the B&M, leading to its reclassification as a B-15B. The locomotive, along with its siblings, continued in commuter service, pulling trains from Boston's North Station to Clinton, Massachusetts until retirement in 1956. Later that same year, the 1455, along with a handful of passenger equipment, were bought by F. Nelson Blount as one of the first ever standard gauge rail equipment in his Steamtown, USA collection in North Walpole, New Hampshire, before moving to Bellows Falls, Vermont in 1967, and again to Scranton, Pennsylvania, renamed as Steamtown National Historic Site in 1986. The locomotive was then donated for display at the Edaville Railroad in South Carver, Massachusetts. In November 1993, number 1455 eventually came into the possession of George Bartholomew of the Cape Cod Railroad in Hyannis, Massachusetts, with the locomotive moved to their headquarters for a planned restoration to running condition and used for excursions, pulling various special occasional trains for the first time in its life. However, those plans never came to fruition and fell through due to a lack of completion, and after the incomplete restoration attempt, the locomotive was stored on a siding for a period in Rochester, Massachusetts. After sitting in storage in Rochester, number 1455 was bought by the Danbury Railway Museum in Danbury, Connecticut, which is my home state, in 2000. The locomotive was then acquired by the museum grounds and underwent a cosmetic restoration that took place between early to mid-2003 and was completed between early to mid-2020 during the pandemic with the C word, which we don't talk about ever since it's a dead topic nowadays. As of right now today, the 1455 continues to sit on static display at the Danbury Railway Museum. Whether or not it would run again wouldn't be as likely as many other steam locomotives that had opportunities for a second chance in life, especially for the ones who have ran excursion service for the first time. The locomotive is the sole survivor of the B-15B 260 Moguls, and one of only 6 remaining Boston and Maine steamers in the entire world as well. I mean, even though it looks in great condition to restore to running condition, but that doesn't mean you have to run it anytime soon. Plus, the limited trackage. A significant hurdle for operating the locomotive, even if fully restored, is the lack of mainline trackage rides at the Danbury Railway Museum. Also, don't forget to mention the general challenges of rail restoration. The search results discuss the overall difficulties and long timelines associated with rail restoration projects, particularly mentioning delays and challenges with the Boston and Maine P4A 462 Pacific number 3713 restoration at Steamtown National Historic Site in Scranton, Pennsylvania. But hey, at least we're still getting a B&M steamer back to running condition, unlike the aforementioned 1455 mentioned earlier, which its attempt to bring it back to operation didn't turn out as planned. I mean, it would have been nice if the 1455 would have been restored a long time ago at the Cape Cod Railroad. If that would have happened, it would have enhanced tourist attraction, boosted local economy, strengthened railroad/railway preservation efforts, increased civic pride, and greater interest in rail history. That way, we would have had a B&M B-15B in running condition as of right now today. If the 1455 were to have an actual real opportunity for a second chance in life, one of the best tourist railroads and railroad museums I could think of at the top of my head would have to be the Berkshire Scenic Railway Museum, aka the Lenox Station Museum in Lenox, Massachusetts. To me, it kind of feels like it could be a good candidate for the tourist railroad/railroad museum, ever since of how capable it is by handling that many trains on their railroad lines. Despite the tourist railroad/railroad museum not having an actual steam locomotive running on their roster, as well as one being a static display piece, maybe the 1455 would be a good candidate, because the fact that this locomotive is so underrated that it deserves attention than any other steam engine on the B&M. But in the meantime, we would rather let it be on display at the DRM until further notice when the time is actually right for the locomotive to have an opportunity for excursion service. And also, if any of you guys feel like donating to the restoration project of Boston and Maine 3713, the Constitution, feel free to do so in case you have the money and all. There will be a link in the description box down below in order to support the restoration project of the 3713 in order to get the locomotive back to running condition as soon as possible. Okay, next locomotive! Number 3. Great Northern 2507. This is the only 482 mountain type steam locomotive on this list. And as always, let's begin with the history of the locomotive. The 2507 was classified as a P2. No! No! You chose the second wrong one! Are you f***ing kidding me right now? You chose the third f***ing wrong classification of the f***ing locomotive! You f***ing it! Okay, that's better. Anyways, let's get back with the history of the locomotive. The 2507 was a P2 Class 482 mountain-type steam locomotive built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in October of 1923 and delivered to the Great Northern Railroad for their passenger trains such as the Empire Builder and the Oriental Limited. On February 18, 1948, while operating as a mail train, number 2507 struck a landslide 2.5 miles south of Mukilteo, Washington. The locomotive and a baggage car went over the rock sea wall into Puget Sound, and 2 unoccupied coaches were derailed. Ouch! An engineer, 60-year-old Albert White of Everett, Washington, and a fireman, 28-year-old W.P. Murphy of Seattle, Washington, were both injured in the derailment but survived. White suffered from back and internal injuries, while Murphy lost one of his thumbs. The locomotive was eventually repaired and returned to service. The locomotive continued to operate both freight and passenger trains on the GN until being retired in December of 1957, and was kept in storage for several years in Minnesota. 2507 was sold to the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad, who had promised a steam locomotive to the county of Klickitat, Washington, to display at Maryhill State Park. The locomotive was towed to Vancouver, Washington, and repainted with SP&S lettering, even though it had never been operated by that railroad. It was formally donated to Klickitat County on September 3, 1966, and dedicated to the days of steam locomotives and to the men who operated them. U.S. Rep. Catherine D. May played an important role in securing the locomotive for the county and gave a speech on the day of the handover. In the early 1990s, the locomotive was leased to the Northwest Railway and Locomotive Preservation Association, who planned to restore the engine to service. In October 1992, it was repainted to restore its original Great Northern logo. On January 29, 1994, the locomotive was transported on a river barge to Pasco, Washington for restoration. However, the planned restoration never took place. Well, one of the reasons why the restoration project never occurred was because of several groups attempted the restoration, but the efforts ultimately failed. After the initial attempt by the Northwest Railway and Locomotive Preservation Association, the locomotive was leased to the Washington State Roads Historical Society, but only minimal restoration work was conducted. Following the restoration attempts, the locomotive sat in Pasco for nearly a decade without the restoration being completed. The restoration effort was unfortunately broke down, according to reports. On July 7, 2003, the locomotive was pulled by a BNSF locomotive to its current home in Rishram, Washington, about 126 miles away. During this journey, the locomotive was restricted to 20 miles an hour to prevent damage to its bearings. A new paint job, costing about $70,000, returned the locomotive to its 1950s all-black appearance. The locomotive is now displayed near the Amtrak Wishram train station in Wishram, Washington, at a once ARC site built by Klickitat County for nearly $300,000. The 2507 is one of only two surviving GN-P2 class mountain-type steam locomotives left to be preserved, with fellow survivor number 2523 on display at the Kandiyohi County Historical Society in Wilmar, Minnesota. As of right now today, the 2507 resides at the Amtrak Wishram train station in Wishram, Washington. Whether or not it would run again is unlikely due to the two attempts to bring it back to running condition failed and never had an opportunity for a second chance in life. But hey, at least we're still getting a GN steamer back in operation, being H5 Class 462 Pacific Type Steam Locomotive number 1355. At the Sioux City Railroad Museum in Sioux City, Iowa. But still, just like the four aforementioned missed opportunity steam locomotives for excursion service in this list, it would have been nice if the 2507 would have been restored a long time ago between the early to mid 1990s, thus would have been the first ever GN steamer to be restored back to operation since April 1958, and maybe another 482 in excursion service as well. If the 2507 were to operate again, one of the best places I could think of at the top of my head might be the Great Northern Railway Historical Society at Minneapolis/St. Paul, aka the Twin Cities, in Minnesota, along with S2 Class 484 Northern Type Steam Locomotive number 2584, which me and many other GN fans would also want to see back in running condition as well. Plus, if those two GN steamers were to be restored to running condition, imagine an epic GN steam triple header with those two locomotives, along with the previously stated 1355. I mean, it would be epic as to one of us. But I'm not sure if one of these two proposed future restoration projects would even occur, but we'll see what happens. I mean, like, we're not expecting each other for these locomotives to be back in operation, especially with all the modern restrictions on any Class 1 railroad as of right now, today as well. Plus, restoring a steam locomotive to full running condition is an extremely complex and multitask undertaking. It requires significant expertise, resources, and time due to the complexity of the machinery and the age of most surviving steam locomotives. But, if me, someone, or maybe the Railway Historical Society has the money and all actually, maybe we might have those two GN steamers back in operation running excursion service for the first time. But in the meantime, we would rather wait until further notice when the time is actually right for those two GN steamers to be back in operation with an opportunity for a second chance in life running excursions for the first time. And only time will tell. Thomas, say the line again.
There will be, but that'll have to wait until next time.
I mean, at least we should still be happy with what we have as of right now, as the 1355 will soon be the first ever GN steamer to be back in running condition, and the first one to move under its own power for the first time since April of 1958 in nearly 60 to 70 years. If any of you rail fans and non-rail fans want to donate to the restoration project of the 1355, links will be in the description box down below of the video. Alright, next locomotive! Number 2. Santa Fe 3759. Another Santa Fe 484 on this list. This locomotive was classified as a 3751 class 484 northern type steam locomotive outshopped by the Baldwin Locomotive Works for the Santa Fe in 1928. Originally a coal-burning locomotive with 73-inch diameter driving wheels, the fleet was converted to burn oil in 1936 and rebuilt between 1938 and 1941 with 80-inch diameter driving wheels. The 3759's regular service was pulling passenger trains on the Santa Fe's main line through Kingsman, Arizona, which was a water stop. Number 3759 was retired in 1953 that had traveled over 2,585,000 miles. On February of 1955, the 3759 was brought out of retirement at the request of the Railway Club of Southern California for a special excursion run dubbed Farewell to Steam. This special ran on February 6, a round trip between Los Angeles Union Station, Los Angeles, and Barstow, California, with stops in Pasadena and San Bernardino, and was the last Santa Fe Revenue steam train to leave Los Angeles and traverse Cajun Pass. This excursion run sounded familiar to what happened with Norfolk and Western Y6B to A82 Compound Mallet number 2174 that was also used on a Farewell to Steam excursion on the N&W on July 11, 1959, but the difference is that the 2174 is a 2A82 Compound Mallet and 3759 is a 484 Northern. Another difference is that the 3759 is actually preserved, while the 2174, along with Tenderless Y6 to A82 Compound Mallet number 2143, were both sold to a scrapyard. Before 16 years later, on February 16, 1976, those British bastards had to buy out the yard and scrap the locomotives, denying the local chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. But 3759, on the other hand, was brought back into storage until Santa Fe donated the locomotive to Kingsman Locomotive Park at the city of Kingsman, Arizona, in 1957. In 1987, caboose number 999520 was retired and donated to the same exact locomotive park where the 3759 was displayed at Kingsman, AZ, to be added behind the locomotive. The residents of Kingsman pulled the locomotive forward 30 feet, aka 9.1 meters, to make room for the caboose. In January 1991, mentioned earlier, the Grand Canyon Railway at Williams, Arizona owner Max Bygert sent a letter to Kingman city officials of his proposal to lease AT&SF 3759 to operation and donate his engine, Lake Superior Ishpeming 280 Consolidation number 19 to the city. The 3759 would have run on the Grand Canyon Railway and an Orient Express-style train between Los Angeles, California and Williams, Arizona. Unfortunately, the community reacted negatively to the plan, it did not go forward, fell through, and the 3759 would have been traded with Lake Superior and Ishpeming 280 Consolidation number 18 instead. The same exact thing that applied to the other aforementioned AT&SF Northern number 2925, with the two attempts of the locomotive having the opportunity for a second chance in life too. And of course, we already know which AT&SF Northern will return to service 11 months later, on December 27, 1991, and that will be 3751. And 30 years later, during COVID, on July 24th, 2021, 2926. Heck, and just like the 2925 mentioned earlier, even if the 3759 would have been restored a long time ago, also, it would have been so cool if all four AT&SF Northerns would have a reunion. But hey, at least we'll still have two AT&SF Northerns running that we all know and love today. And also don't forget to mention that the other aforementioned AT&SF 210-4 Texas types may be able to have the opportunity for a second chance in life. But, and just like the aforementioned 5021, exciting news for the 3759 also. A planned cosmetic restoration has been made on petition so they would cosmetically restore the 3759 into its former glory. And we also know of what I said at the ending of the GN 2507 segment of why steam locomotives that never had the opportunity for a second chance in life and the ones that have not operated in preservation era would run again because of the original owners would claim ownership of them and how it would work. But yeah. Now, before we get into number 1, I would like to include some honorable mentions on this list. And now for the number 1 pick. Southern Pacific 5021. I had to save the best for last because the Southern Pacific is my favorite railroad of all time. Plus, this locomotive has the same exact number as Santa Fe 5021 mentioned earlier. Kind of funny and sus, right? Okay. Anyways, let's get on to the history of the locomotive. Southern Pacific 5021 is an SP2 class 410-2 overland type steam locomotive built by the American Locomotive Company, aka ALCO, at their Schenectady shops in Schenectady, New York in 1926. Instead of using the nickname Overlands, however, the SP decided to name their engines Southern Pacifics after the railroad itself, and which to me, it sounds kinda like dull and dumb, to be honest. I really agree with Jim Vanderkolk about the Southern Pacific name for the SP410-2s that wouldn't be as good as other steam locomotives with their wheel arrangements receiving different nicknames. I mean, like, bro, why can't you just nickname them Sierras after the Sierra Nevada mountain range being a part of one of the subdivisions on the SP? I mean, that would have been much more of a unique nickname for the SP410-2s, but it is what it is. And anyways, back to the history of the locomotive. The 5021 was designed to haul mixed freight and passenger trains over the Sierra Nevada range between Northern California and Nevada. Later in its career, number 5021 was shifted to service in Oregon, where it remained until its retirement in 1955. It is the only member of this class of SP locomotives to be preserved, one of only 5 3-cylinder locomotives preserved in North America, and also one of only 3 surviving 410-2 overland type steam locomotives to be preserved in the entire world. The other 2 being Baldwin Locomotive Works 60,000, a water tube boiler type steam locomotive, on display at the Franklin Institute Museum of Science, Technology, and Industry at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and a Henschel Locomotive Works Brazilian 410-2 overland number 193 on display at the Museum of Technology in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Southern Pacific donated number 5021 to the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society on March 8, 1956. In 1961, the California chapter began operating the 5021 on the museum's spur line. This continued until the society was sent a cease and desist notice from Southern Pacific lawyers asking them to stop operating the engine. After contacting the president of the Southern Pacific at the time, Don Russell, they found out that the lawyers had made the letter on their own violation, without talking to the higher-ups. Mr. Russell gave permission to the society to continue operating the engine and to ignore the cease and desist order. However, the Southern Pacific did not like this, so they were forced to pull the tracks in 1963. Following this, number 5021 was stored in the roundhouse of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, aka Santa Fe Railroad. While it was stored, a possible excursion career for number 5021 was being arranged by the Santa Fe. However, the plans never came to fruition and they were dropped. In another excursion, the 5021 was originally supposed to pull the American Freedom Train, but unfortunately, Southern Pacific 4449 and Texas Pacific 610 were chosen instead.
The locomotive was moved once again to the Southern California chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society's collection. In 1976, while moving the 5021 by crane to its current location, it derailed while negotiating the curves leading to the entrance of the museum grounds. In order to re-rail the locomotive, a crane was brought in to lift it back onto the track. However, the way the re-railing was achieved was not correctly carried out. The crane company put the cable under the smoke box instead of the frame, leading to all of the weight tugging down from the bottom of the smoke box from the front of the frame. Witness anecdotes say that the locomotive's rivets between the smokebox saddle and the smokebox made a popping noise as it was lifted, with one person remarking, "Well, that engine will never run again."
In 1991, number 5021 made an appearance as the Ghost Train in a made-for-television horror film, Sometimes They Come Back, using Norfolk and Western 1218's whistle instead of its real whistle. But it'll be nice if it would have used its real whistle in the film, but it is what it is. The locomotive was also featured in Boppin' with the Biggles and Little Red Caboose with Union Pacific Big Boy number 4014 in 1995. As of right now today, the 5021 is part of the collection of the Southern California chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society on permanent display at the Rail Giants Train Museum at the Los Angeles County Fairplex in Pomona, California. Very unlikely to run again. To be honest, if the engine would have had the opportunity for a second chance of life in excursion service, it would be a sight to see, as the only 410-2 it would have been operational as of right now today. And also guys, to be honest, if there were any steam locomotive that I were to restore to running condition, it would have to be this one, along with Santa Fe 2925 mentioned earlier, maybe even bringing back an extinct Southern Pacific MT4482 Mountain Type number 4350 from the rails up. And also, I will need to give you credit, Jem, for creating the local profiling episode of Southern Pacific 5021 that you did last year, which I'm very pleased with, and it inspired me to do this video by adding the 5021 in my segment of my top 6 missed opportunity steam locomotives for excursion service. Yeah, despite not remembering some information that I explained in the video in the 5021 segment, you still did a pretty good job. The one and only sole surviving SP Overland, with the 2 opportunities for a second chance in life, have never come to fruition, and apart from being built by my favorite railroad company of all time, has shared her spot as my #1 pick for the top 6 missed opportunity steam locomotives for excursion service. Steam locomotives that have not operated in the preservation era, which never had an opportunity for excursion service, could be sometimes a shame, ever since the amount of fans really wanted it to return back to operation. Whether being a permanent display piece as a static exhibit in poor condition, whether either to large or small, and others, etc., to operate on excursion services. But hey, at least we still have most steam locomotives that have had second chances in life for excursion services, whether some being operational today, on display, cosmetically or operationally restored, stored either for operational excursion service or display as one of their future purposes, and others, etc. However, if there's a way to restore one of the steam locomotives that have never had an opportunity for excursion service by having a second chance in life, maybe if any Railfan or non-Railfan has the money and all, then who knows, one of them may be able to run again. And of course, we already know how the steam locomotive railroad preservation is nowadays. The restoration projects are expensive, the challenges, logistics, benefits, and others. But one can only hope that one of these locomotives in the video would have a second chance in life in the not-so-distant future. And in the meantime, we would rather wait until further notice when the time is actually right for one of these engines in the list to have an opportunity for excursion service. Hey guys, it's Amity Blight and SP4449 fan here, and thank you so much for watching my first ever long-length top list video that I've ever created. Yeah, despite college, spending time with friends on YouTube live streams, Discord, playing video games, and others, etc. got in the way, I still managed to make the video. I just can't believe how much effort I've put into this video that I've talked about every single steam locomotive in the video, which I'm very proud of. If you want me to do more lists of trains, especially with like animation, artists, sports, and others, etc., feel free to suggest me on which ones that I should do. And anyways, guys, I wish you guys a good luck, goodbye, adios, and you know what Christopher Kovacs would say? Keep on steaming! Woo woo!
Locomotives.